When homeless nurse Zoe saves an old man's life in a rainy alleyway, she never imagines that by morning, the city's most feared crime lord would be offering her a deal that will change everything. As danger closes in from all sides, Zoe and Dominic find themselves drawn together by forces stronger than fear, protection turning to connection in ways neither could have anticipated. But when her violent past collides with his dangerous present, can two broken people find sanctuary in the shadows, or will the price of love in a criminal world prove too deadly to survive? Rain fell hard against Zoe's old car. She pulled her thin jacket tighter as she counted the money from her shift at the diner. $12 in tips. Not nearly enough. The small notebook in her lap showed the sad truth. She was still $2,000 away from getting an apartment. Zoe had been living in her car for 3 months now, ever since she ran away from Mike. Her phone lit up with a message. Another no for a nursing job. Zoe sighed and put the phone down. They never hired people without a home address. It didn't matter that she had been a good nurse for 8 years. It didn't matter how many lives she had saved. Without a home, no one wanted her. The rain made the windows foggy. Zoe wiped a small circle clear with her sleeve and looked out at the dark street. Most people stayed away from this part of town at night. Bad things happened here. That's why Zoe parked here. No one bothered a beat-up car in the shadows between 2 old warehouses. Through the rain, Zoe spotted an old man walking unsteadily on the sidewalk. Something was wrong. He stumbled, put his hand on the wall, then started to fall. Without thinking, Zoe grabbed her first aid kit from the back seat, one of the few things she'd taken when she fled, and rushed out into the rain. "Sir, can you hear me?" Zoe reached the old man just as he collapsed. She knelt beside him, not caring about the cold water soaking through her jeans. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow. Zoe opened her kit and worked quickly, placing her jacket over him to keep him warm. "I'm a nurse," she told him, though his eyes stayed closed. "Help is coming. Stay with me." Zoe didn't notice the small camera above the warehouse door, its red light blinking as it recorded everything. It took 20 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. Zoe gave the paramedics all the information they needed, then stepped back as they loaded the old man inside. One of them offered her a blanket, but she refused. "He needs it more than me." Back in her car, Zoe shivered as she peeled off her wet clothes. She had one dry shirt left, and no way to wash the wet ones until the laundromat opened tomorrow. Her stomach growled. She'd used her meal coupon at the diner for breakfast, meaning no dinner tonight. Zoe reclined her seat as far as it would go and pulled her only blanket up to her chin. The rain drummed against the roof, a sound that had become oddly comforting over the past months. Her last thought before sleep took her was about the old man. She hoped he would be okay. She couldn't know that by helping him, she had caught the eye of someone powerful, someone dangerous. Someone who never missed anything that happened in his territory, and by morning, her life would never be the same. Zoe woke with a start. Something wasn't right. The morning light filled her car, but there was a shadow blocking it. Her heart jumped as she sat up straight, still wrapped in her blanket. 3 big black cars surrounded her small blue sedan. They were shiny and expensive, with dark windows that hid whoever was inside. Zoe's hands shook as she tried to think what to do. Run. There was nowhere to go. Call for help? No one would come in this part of town. A sharp knock on her window made her jump. A tall man in a black suit stood there. His face showed no feeling at all, like he was made of stone. He had a small earpiece in one ear, and his hands were clasped in front of him. "Miss Reeves?" His voice was muffled through the glass. "Mr. Castellano would like to speak with you." Zoe's mouth went dry. Everyone in the city knew that name. Dominic Castellano owned the waterfront. People whispered about him. The businesses he controlled. The people who crossed him and disappeared. And now, he wanted to talk to her. I didn't do anything, Zoe said through the crack in her window. The man's face stayed blank. This isn't about something you did wrong. Please come with me now. Zoe looked around at the black cars. There were more men in suits standing beside them, watching. She had no choice. Slowly, she gathered her purse and phone, trying to look calm while her heart raced like a rabbit's. The ride was silent. Zoe sat in the back of the middle car, a man on either side of her. They drove toward the water, through streets that got cleaner and fancier. Finally, they stopped in front of a restaurant with big glass windows facing the ocean. A sign on the door said closed, but the man opened it anyway and led Zoe inside. The restaurant was empty of customers. Morning light streamed in through the windows, making the white tablecloths glow. It smelled of coffee and fresh bread. In a corner table sat a man by himself, reading papers spread out in front of him. Dominic Castellano didn't look up as Zoe approached. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his late 30s. His dark hair was cut short and neat, and his suit looked like it cost more than Zoe had ever made in a month. Everything about him seemed sharp and precise. "Sir," the guard said, "Miss Reeves is here." Only then did Dominic look up. His eyes were dark and steady, taking in everything about Zoe, her worn jeans, her wrinkled shirt, her hair pulled back in a quick ponytail. His face gave away nothing of what he thought. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. Zoe sat, placing her purse in her lap like a shield. Up close, she could see the power in Dominic's shoulders, the careful way he moved. This was a man who was always in control. "The man you helped last night," Dominic began without saying hello, "is Giuseppe. He's worked for my family for 40 years. Zoe swallowed hard. "Is he okay?" Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. Surprise, maybe. "He's stable. The doctors say he had a small stroke." Zoe nodded. That matched what she had seen. "I'm glad he's getting care." "Why did you help him?" Dominic asked, watching her closely. The question made Zoe sit up straighter. Despite her fear, she felt a flicker of anger. He needed help. Anyone would have done the same. Dominic's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "No, they wouldn't have. Not in that neighborhood." He tapped his fingers on the table, studying her. "You're a medical professional." "I was a trauma nurse," she corrected, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "At City Memorial." "Was?" "I left my job 3 months ago." Dominic nodded slightly, like this confirmed something he already knew. Why help a stranger when you clearly need help yourself? The question wasn't unkind, just direct. "That's what nurses do," Zoe answered simply. The words hung in the air between them. Before Dominic could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at it, then answered. "Castellano." The call was brief, but his face darkened as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at Zoe with new interest. "That was the hospital. Giuseppe had a major stroke. The doctor says without your quick help on the street, he would have died before the ambulance arrived." Zoe didn't know what to say to that. She had just done what she was trained to do. Dominic made another call, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian. His voice was low but commanding. When he finished, he put the phone down and studied Zoe again. "I need someone with medical training, tonight." He named a sum that made Zoe's eyes widen. $5,000 for one night's work. The amount would solve her housing crisis instantly. It would mean a safe place to live, a chance to start over. But Zoe wasn't born yesterday. Men like Dominic Castellano didn't offer that kind of money for simple work. "What's the catch?" she asked. "What would I need to do?" "Someone is injured. They cannot go to a hospital." Dominic's face was unreadable. "That's all." Zoe hesitated. "Is it drugs? Something illegal?" "No drugs," Dominic said firmly, Nothing illegal for you. The person needs medical attention. That's all I'm asking from you. Zoe thought of her car, of another cold night sleeping in the front seat. She thought of the rejection emails, the dwindling money, the fear of being found by Mike. Just treatment? Nothing else? You have my word, Dominic said, and his eyes held hers steadily. Something about his direct gaze made Zoe believe him, despite everything she knew she should fear. She took a deep breath. When and where? Tonight, 8 o'clock. My men will pick you up. Dominic slid a card across the table. It had only a phone number on it. If you change your mind, call this number before then. Otherwise, be ready. As Dominic stood up, signaling the end of their meeting, Zoe noticed how everyone in the room straightened slightly, all eyes turning to him. He moved like someone used to being watched, used to being obeyed without question. One more thing, he said, looking down at her. The car you're living in isn't safe. Not in that area. Until tonight, I've arranged a hotel room. He nodded to one of his men who placed a key card on the table. It's paid for. Use it or don't. Your choice. With that, he walked away, leaving Zoe sitting at the table, the key card and phone number in front of her, like two paths leading in very different directions. Through the window, she could see the ocean sparkling in the morning sun, beautiful and dangerous all at once, much like the offer she had just received. The black car moved through the city as darkness fell. Zoe sat in the back seat with a blindfold over her eyes. The soft leather seat felt strange after months of sleeping in her old car. She had spent the day in the hotel room Dominic gave her, taking a long hot shower and sleeping in a real bed. Now she was headed into the unknown. How much longer? She asked the driver. 5 minutes, came the short reply. Zoe's hands twisted in her lap. The $5,000 would change everything for her. She could get an apartment, buy decent clothes for job interviews, start over. But at what cost? The car stopped and someone opened her door. This way, Miss Reeves. A hand gently guided her from the car. The air felt cooler here. And she could smell water nearby. They must be near the ocean. Can I take this off now? Zoe asked, touching the blindfold. Just a few more steps. They entered a building. Zoe heard an elevator ding, felt herself rising up, up, up. When the elevator stopped, someone untied her blindfold. Zoe blinked as her eyes adjusted to the light. She stood in the fanciest place she had ever seen. The room stretched out before her with walls made almost entirely of glass. Through them, the city sparkled below like a blanket of stars. The floors were smooth white marble that shone like ice. Paintings that looked very old and very expensive hung on the few actual walls. This way, said the man who had brought her up. He led Zoe through the main room toward a hallway. Everything she passed looked like it cost more than she had ever owned in her life. They reached a door at the end of the hall. The man knocked once and then opened it. The nurse is here, sir. Dominic stood by a large bed where an old woman lay, her white hair spread across the pillows. Her skin was pale, and a bruise darkened one side of her face. Beside the bed stood a cart filled with medical supplies, bandages, IV bags, monitors. Thank you for coming, Dominic said, his voice softer than it had been at the restaurant. This is my grandmother, Rosa. Zoe moved forward, her nurse's instincts taking over. What happened? She fell this morning, hit her head on the coffee table. Dominic's hands were clasped tightly behind his back. Her regular nurse is unavailable, and we can't risk a hospital. Zoe looked at the old woman more closely. She's unconscious? She woke briefly after it happened, recognized me, spoke a little, then she drifted off again. Zoe set down her small bag and moved to the bed. She checked the woman's pulse, lifted her eyelids to check her pupils, felt gently around the bruising on her temple. I need to monitor her closely. Possible concussion. Maybe worse. Why can't you take her to a hospital? Zoe asked as she worked, setting up the monitors from the cart. My family has enemies, Dominic said simply. Hospitals mean vulnerability, paperwork, questions. People who would hurt me don't care who gets caught in the middle. For the first time, Zoe heard something like fear in his voice. Not fear for himself, but for the frail woman in the bed. Tell me about the supplies you have, Zoe said, focusing on what she could control. Dominic showed her the medical equipment, far better than what many clinics had. Whoever had gathered these supplies knew exactly what might be needed. Zoe worked steadily, setting up an IV, attaching monitoring equipment, examining the head wound more carefully. Good news, she said after a thorough check. The cut is superficial. Her vitals are stable. I think she's just had a concussion, but we need to watch her carefully tonight. Dominic nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his eyes never leaving his grandmother's face. You care about her a lot, Zoe observed as she adjusted the IV drip. She raised me, Dominic said, so quietly Zoe almost didn't hear. After my parents were killed. Zoe didn't ask how they died. She didn't need to. Through the night, Zoe monitored Rosa's condition. Dominic stayed nearby, sometimes leaving to make calls but always returning quickly. Around midnight, Rosa stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Nico? She called weakly, looking at Dominic. He moved to her side instantly, taking her hand. I'm here, Nonna. The old woman spoke in rapid Italian, her voice fading in and out. Dominic answered gently in the same language. Zoe watched the transformation in his face, the hardness melting away, replaced by tenderness she wouldn't have thought possible from the man she'd met in the restaurant. Rosa drifted back to sleep, but her vital signs were stronger. Zoe adjusted the monitors and caught Dominic watching her. You're good at this, he said. I worked in trauma for 8 years, Zoe replied. I've seen worse. Why did you leave nursing? The question was direct, as all his questions seemed to be. Zoe turned away, busying herself with the equipment. Personal reasons. To her surprise, Dominic didn't push. There's coffee in the kitchen if you need it. And food. The kitchen was as fancy as the rest of the place, with shiny appliances and counters made of black stone. Zoe found coffee already made, still hot in an expensive-looking pot. She poured some into a mug and stood by the window, looking out at the city below. How strange to be here, so high above the streets where she had been sleeping just last night. From up here, the city looked peaceful, beautiful even. But Zoe knew the reality on the ground was different, harsh and unforgiving. Just like the man whose home she was in. When she returned to Rosa's room, she found Dominic showing a younger man how to read the monitors. This is Marco, Dominic said. My security chief. I need to step out for an hour. He'll be here if you need anything. Marco nodded to Zoe but said nothing. His jacket hung oddly on one side, and Zoe guessed he was carrying a gun. Your grandmother should be fine, Zoe said to Dominic, but call me immediately if anything changes. She wrote her number on a notepad by the bed. Dominic looked at it, then at her. You could have left this number disconnected, taken the money and disappeared. I'm a nurse, Zoe said simply. I don't abandon patients. Something shifted in Dominic's eyes, not quite a smile, but a recognition. I'll be back soon. When he returned an hour later, his knuckles were bruised and there was a small speck of blood on his white shirt collar. Zoe noticed but said nothing. This was his world, not hers. She was just passing through. By morning, Rosa was awake and talking softly. Her eyes were clear, and the monitors showed strong vital signs. As promised, Dominic handed Zoe an envelope. Your payment, plus a bonus. He slid a small card across the table. And this. Zoe looked at it. A key card with an address. What's this? An apartment in a building I own. First year's rent paid. Zoe stiffened. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Dominic corrected. It's a retainer. My grandmother needs ongoing care from someone I can trust. His eyes held hers. The apartment comes with the position. Zoe should refuse. Everything about this arrangement screamed danger. But she thought of her car, of another night huddled in the cold. She thought of the frail woman in the bed who clearly needed skilled care. I'll consider it, she said carefully. Temporarily. Temporarily, Dominic agreed, though something in his expression suggested he didn't believe it any more than she did. 3 weeks passed quickly in Zoe's new life. She woke each morning in the small but beautiful apartment Dominic had given her. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the windows let in plenty of sunlight. After months of living in her car, having a real bed, a kitchen, and a bathroom all to herself still felt like a dream. Zoe kept her morning job at the diner. She liked the routine of it, the normal feeling of serving coffee and taking orders. But her evenings belonged to Rosa now. Each day at 5 o'clock, one of Dominic's men would pick her up and drive her to the glass tower by the water. Rosa was getting stronger. Most days she sat in a chair by the window, wrapped in soft blankets. She had good days when her mind was sharp, and harder days when she got confused. Zoe had learned to tell which kind of day it was from Rosa's first words. On this evening, Rosa smiled when Zoe walked in. There you are, dear. I was telling Dominic about the summer we spent in Sicily, but he doesn't remember the name of that little restaurant by the sea. A good day then. Zoe set down her nursing bag and smiled at the old woman. Dominic stood nearby, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked almost normal like that, almost like a regular man visiting his grandmother. I'll leave you two, he said, nodding to Zoe. I have calls to make. When he was gone, Rosa patted the chair next to her. Sit, sit. I want to tell you about my grandson. The boy you're seeing now? He wasn't always this serious. Zoe checked Rosa's blood pressure as the old woman talked. He was such a serious child. Always watching, always protecting, never really living. Rosa sighed. His parents were killed when he was 14. I raised him after that, but the boy had to grow up too fast. He seems very devoted to you, Zoe said, writing down Rosa's numbers in the chart. He's a good boy at heart. Rosa squeezed Zoe's hand, just wrapped in too many hard layers, like an artichoke. Zoe laughed at the comparison. She couldn't imagine fierce, controlled Dominic as an artichoke. Sometimes during their talks, Rosa would get confused. She would start speaking in Italian, fast and worried. Sometimes she called Zoe by another name, Eliana, and spoke as if Zoe were Dominic's mother. During these moments, Zoe would just hold the old woman's hand until the confusion passed. She noticed how these episodes seemed to pain Dominic, though he tried to hide it. One evening, Zoe arrived to find the penthouse strangely quiet. No security men stood by the elevator, no Rosa calling a greeting from her room. For a moment, panic gripped Zoe's chest. Had something happened? Had they moved and not told her? Then she heard a noise from the kitchen. Following the sound, she found Dominic surrounded by cooking chaos. Pots and pans covered every surface. Something red bubbled on the stove, splattering the counter. Flour dusted the floor. In the middle of it all stood Dominic, looking more lost than Zoe had ever seen him. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping carefully around a puddle of what looked like olive oil. Dominic glanced up, a streak of tomato sauce on his cheek. "She's having a bad day. Confused? Upset? Food sometimes brings her back. This was her specialty, but..." He waved at the disaster around him. "The recipe isn't working." Zoe looked at the mess, a pot of sauce boiled over on the stove. She moved quickly to turn down the heat, then peered inside. Is this supposed to be lasagna? Her lasagna recipe. Dominic sounded frustrated. She made it every Sunday when I was growing up. Without comment, Zoe washed her hands, then rolled up her sleeves. She tasted the sauce, added more salt and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. Do you have garlic? Basil? They worked side by side, salvaging what they could of the sauce. Zoe showed Dominic how to layer the noodles and cheese properly. Their hands sometimes touched as they worked, and Zoe noticed how careful he was not to crowd her, how he followed her instructions without question. You don't ask questions, Dominic said as they waited for the lasagna to bake. The kitchen smelled of tomatoes and herbs. About my business. Most people would be curious. Would you answer if I did? Zoe challenged, wiping flour from the counter. Dominic laughed, the sound surprising both of them. Probably not. Then why waste the breath? She shrugged. I've learned to recognize dangerous men. I was married to one. Something dangerous flashed in Dominic's eyes. Was? I left, Zoe said simply. Hence the car. Before he could respond, they heard Rosa calling. They brought dinner to her room on a tray, with a small vase of flowers Zoe had picked up on her way from the diner. For a blessed hour, the elderly woman was fully present, delighted by the food and the company. Just like I used to make, Rosa exclaimed, her eyes bright. You remembered, Nico? Zoe helped, Dominic admitted. A lot. Rosa smiled knowingly between them but said nothing. Zoe watched Dominic during the meal. He seemed younger somehow, the hard lines of his face softened. He told stories about his childhood that made Rosa laugh, and for that hour, the penthouse felt like a home rather than a fortress. Later, as Zoe prepared to leave, Dominic walked her to the elevator. They stood in comfortable silence, waiting for the doors to open. Your ex-husband, he said carefully. Is he looking for you? The question sent ice through Zoe's veins. Why? My security team does background checks. There are patterns in your movements, like someone trying to stay hidden. Zoe considered lying, then decided against it. Yes, he's a police detective. Makes disappearing complicated. Dominic nodded once, his expression unreadable. Good to know. Does that change things? Zoe asked, not sure why it mattered what he thought. No. His answer was immediate, but it helps me understand. The elevator arrived, but Dominic held the door before Zoe could step in. Why did you become a nurse? The question seemed random, unexpected. I wanted to help people, Zoe said simply, make a difference. Even after everything you've seen? The worst of people? Zoe thought about it. Maybe because of it. Someone has to balance the scales. Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Good night, Zoe. As the elevator carried her down, Zoe wondered about the strange conversation. Why did he care about her ex-husband? About her reasons for becoming a nurse? More importantly, why did she care what he thought? The next morning, an envelope arrived at her apartment. Inside was information about nursing classes at the local college, with a note that said simply, to balance the scales. D. Zoe stood by her window, holding the papers. She should tear them up, give Dominic back his apartment and his money, and walk away. This world wasn't hers. The man in the penthouse was everything she should avoid. Powerful, dangerous, controlling. Just like Mike had been, though in different ways. But as she looked at the nursing school information, she realized something had changed. Dominic controlled everything around him, yes, but unlike Mike, he hadn't once tried to control her. The nursing school information wasn't an order. It was an open door she could walk through, or not. That night, when Dominic asked if she'd received the envelope, Zoe nodded. I've applied for the spring semester. His face remained neutral, but his eyes warmed slightly. Rosa will be pleased to hear it. Zoe smiled, knowing it wasn't just Rosa who would be pleased. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt strangely like coming home. 2 months after meeting Dominic, Zoe hardly recognized her life. Her nursing classes had started and she was doing well. Her small apartment felt like home, with plants on the windowsill and a soft rug that warmed the living room floor. Rosa was growing stronger under her care, and their evenings together had fallen into a comfortable pattern that Zoe found herself looking forward to each day. The spring rain tapped against the windows of the diner as Zoe finished her morning shift. She hung up her apron and waved goodbye to Fran, the cook who always saved her a muffin. On the sidewalk, she spotted the now familiar black car waiting to take her to the penthouse. Today, she was going early. Rosa had a doctor's appointment, and Zoe wanted to check her blood pressure before they left. But when the car pulled up to the tower, Zoe instantly knew something was wrong. 4 more black SUVs were parked outside, and men with serious faces stood guard at the entrance. They nodded to Zoe's driver but stopped Zoe herself. "ID," one said firmly, though he had seen her nearly every day for months. Zoe showed her driver's license. The guard checked it against something on his phone, then nodded. 11th floor today, not the penthouse. "Why? What's happening?" Zoe asked, worry rising in her chest. The guard didn't answer. The driver escorted her to the 11th floor, where a large apartment had been set up with medical equipment. Rosa was already there, looking confused and upset. "Zoe, thank goodness!" the old woman cried when she saw her. "No one will tell me what's going on. Where is Dominic?" "I don't know," Zoe admitted, setting down her bag. She turned to the guard by the door. "What's happening? Why were we moved?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Security issue, ma'am. That's all I can say." Zoe checked Rosa's blood pressure, which was higher than usual. "You need to stay calm," she told the older woman, holding her hand. "Your grandson wouldn't let anything happen to you." "It's not me I'm worried about," Rosa said, her eyes filling with tears. Zoe stayed with Rosa, trying to keep her calm and occupied. Hours passed with no word from Dominic. Outside, the rain turned into a heavy storm, lightning flashing across the darkening sky. The guards changed shifts, but none would tell them anything. Zoe tried calling Dominic's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Around 4 in the afternoon, the elevator pinged. Zoe looked up hopefully, but it wasn't Dominic who stepped out. It was a young guard she'd become friendly with over the past weeks. "Carlo," Zoe said, crossing the room to him. "Please, what's going on?" Carlo looked over his shoulder, then leaned closer to Zoe. "Rival family made a move," he whispered. "Tried to hit the boss this morning." Zoe's blood ran cold. "Is he?" "He's fine," Carlo assured her quickly. "Angry, but fine. They've moved everyone important to secure locations until they figure out how the hit team knew where he'd be." Before Zoe could ask more questions, the elevator opened again. This time it was Dominic, surrounded by 4 men. He looked different than Zoe had ever seen him, cold, hard, his face set like stone. He barked orders as he walked, not even glancing in Zoe's direction. Only when Rosa called his name did he turn. "Nonna," he said, his voice softening slightly. "You're safe. That's what matters." "Dominic?" Zoe stepped forward. "What's happening?" He seemed to notice her for the first time. In 3 quick steps, he crossed to her and took her arm, pulling her away from the others. "You shouldn't be here today," he said, his voice low and tight. "Rosa needs consistency, especially during stress," Zoe countered, pulling her arm free. She was surprised to find she wasn't afraid of him, even like this. "This isn't about," Dominic began, but was interrupted by his security chief. "Boss, we found him. The leak was Romano." The transformation in Dominic was immediate and terrifying. the man who carefully monitored his grandmother's medication, who sometimes brought Zoe coffee exactly how she liked it, vanished. In his place stood someone Zoe had always known existed but never fully witnessed, the Dominic Castellano who controlled the city's underworld through fear and force. "Bring him here," he ordered, then turned to Zoe. "You should go." Instead, she moved toward Rosa's room. "I'll stay with her." For a moment, Zoe thought he might argue. But Rosa called out again, her voice trembling, and Dominic's face softened just enough. 11th floor only. Don't leave this apartment for any reason." Zoe nodded, then slipped into Rosa's room, closing the door behind her. The old woman was shaking, her hands twisted in her lap. "It's happening again," she whispered. "Just like with his father." Zoe sat beside her, taking her cold hands. "Try not to worry. Dominic knows what he's doing." "That's what frightens me," Rosa replied. They stayed together in the bedroom while men came and went outside. Rosa eventually fell asleep, exhausted from stress and worry. Zoe tucked the blankets around her and dimmed the lights before quietly opening the door. The main room was empty except for 2 guards by the elevator. Through the window, Zoe could see the storm had grown worse. Rain lashed against the glass, and lightning split the sky every few minutes. She checked her watch. Nearly 9. She'd been here much longer than usual, but no one had mentioned taking her home. The elevator opened and Dominic stepped out. His face looked carved from stone, but Zoe noticed other things too. How his shoulders were tight with tension, how one hand was clenched at his side. As the elevator doors closed, he seemed to realize he was being watched. His eyes found Zoe's across the room. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Dominic nodded toward the balcony door. "Fresh air," he said simply. Outside, the covered balcony protected them from the rain, but the wind still whipped around them. The city lights blurred through the downpour, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Dominic stood at the railing, looking out at the storm. Zoe noticed his knuckles were raw and bloodied. She should leave. Walk away and never come back. This wasn't her world, and today had shown exactly why. Instead, she went back inside, found the first aid kit she always carried, and returned to the balcony. Without speaking, she took Dominic's hand and began cleaning the wounds. Neither spoke as she worked, the storm providing all the sound they needed. His hands were warm despite the cold air, and they remained perfectly still as she wrapped the bandages. "You saw what happened to Romano," Dominic finally said. It wasn't a question. Zoe continued bandaging. "I heard enough." "And you're still here." She met his gaze steadily. "Rosa needs consistency." "Is that the only reason?" he challenged, his eyes searching hers. The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Zoe wasn't sure how to answer, wasn't sure what the truth even was anymore. Before she could find the words, Dominic's phone buzzed with an incoming text. His expression darkened as he read it. "Your ex-husband," he said carefully, putting the phone away. "He's in the city, looking for you." Zoe's heart stopped for a moment, then raced ahead twice as fast. "How do you know this?" "I have sources in the police department," Dominic answered, watching her closely. "He's telling people he's looking for his mentally unstable wife who needs medical intervention." The familiar pattern made Zoe's blood run cold. This was how it always started. Mike would tell people she was having problems, that she needed help. Then, when he found her, any injuries she had would be explained away as self-harm or accidents during an episode. No one ever questioned a detective, especially one who seemed so concerned about his poor, troubled wife. "He'll find me eventually," Zoe whispered, her hands starting to shake. "He always does." Lightning flashed, illuminating Dominic's face. In that brief, bright moment, Zoe saw something shift in his expression, something cold and determined and dangerous. "Not this time," he said, his voice quiet but certain. He took her still trembling hands in his bandaged ones. Not this time, Zoe. The storm crashed around them, but somehow Zoe felt calmer than she had all day. She should be terrified by the promise in Dominic's words, by the danger that surrounded her on all sides. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. And that, more than anything, terrified her. Zoe's world narrowed to a single point of terror when Dominic said Mike's name. Her ex-husband was in the city, looking for her. The words echoed in her mind as she rode back to her apartment that night, one of Dominic's men beside her in the car and another following in a second vehicle. "We'll have someone outside your door all night," the driver told her as they pulled up to her building. "Boss's orders?" Zoe nodded, unable to find words. Inside her apartment, she double-checked the locks, then stood at the window watching the rain. She could see the black car parked across the street, a shadow of a man inside. Watching. Protecting. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mike's face, his charming smile that fooled everyone, his eyes when the doors closed and they were alone. The way his hands could go from gentle to crushing in seconds. Morning came with gray light filtering through the blinds. Zoe had just made coffee when someone knocked at her door. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a neat business suit holding a clipboard. "Ms. Reeves?" the woman said, when Zoe cracked the door, security chain still in place. "I'm from Castellano Security Systems. I'm here to upgrade your apartment." 2 hours later, Zoe's apartment had a new door with 3 locks, window sensors, and a small panel by the entrance that connected directly to Dominic's security team. The woman showed Zoe how everything worked, then handed her a new phone. "This replaces your old one," she explained. "It can't be tracked. Mr. Castellano's number is programmed in, along with security." When Zoe arrived at the penthouse that afternoon, the entire security system had been upgraded there too. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Dominic himself met her at the elevator, his face grim. "Rosa's having a bad day," he said without greeting. "She keeps asking for you." The elderly woman was confused, calling Zoe by other names and speaking rapidly in Italian. Zoe sat with her, holding her hand and speaking softly until Rosa drifted to sleep. When Zoe came out of the bedroom, she found Dominic on the phone, his voice hard as he gave orders to someone. Over the following days, Zoe lived in a bubble of fear and strange protection. A driver took her everywhere, to her classes, to the diner, to the penthouse. Men in dark suits were always nearby, watching. Dominic increased security around her apartment building. He never said Mike's name again, but his presence hung over everything like a storm cloud. One evening, a week after the night on the balcony, Zoe arrived at the penthouse to find Rosa more lucid than she'd been in days. The old woman patted the couch beside her. "Come sit, dear," she said, her voice stronger than usual. "We need to talk." Zoe sat, taking Rosa's frail hand. "Are you feeling better today?" "My mind comes and goes," Rosa said with a small smile. "But right now, it's here. And I can see what's happening around me." "What do you mean?" Rosa squeezed Zoe's hand. "He's different with you," she whispered. "Less haunted." "We're just employer and employee," Zoe insisted, ignoring the hollow feeling the words created. Rosa smiled knowingly. "That boy has been alone his whole life, carrying everything on his shoulders since he was 14. He doesn't know how to be anything but the rock everyone leans on." The comment stayed with Zoe as she checked Rosa's vital signs and helped her with her evening medication. She noticed how true it was. Dominic was always the one solving problems, giving orders, taking care of others. Who took care of him? That night, as Zoe prepared dinner in the penthouse kitchen, she felt someone watching her. Dominic stood in the doorway, his suit jacket off, tie loosened. "You don't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the vegetables she was cutting. "We have people who cook." "I know," Zoe replied. But I like cooking. It's normal. She hesitated, then added, and I thought you might be hungry. You didn't eat lunch. Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. Surprise, maybe. You noticed that? I notice a lot of things, Zoe said, returning to her cutting. Dominic stepped into the kitchen, leaning against the counter. Such as? You always check the security cameras before you sit down anywhere. You touch your left wrist when you're worried about Rosa. You drink your coffee black in the morning but with cream after noon. A small smile touched Dominic's lips. Anything else? You're carrying too much, Zoe said softly, the words out before she could stop them. And no one ever asks if you need help. The smile disappeared. Dominic straightened, his face closing off. I don't need... Zoe's phone rang, cutting him off. A number she recognized instantly flashed on the screen. Mike. Her hands froze, the knife clattering to the counter. Before she could move, Dominic was beside her. He took the phone, his face hardening as he saw the name on the screen. Don't answer, Zoe whispered. Please. He'll know where I am. Dominic studied her face, then the phone. Without a word, he answered it himself. Zoe Reeves is under my protection now, he said coldly. Your search ends today. Zoe couldn't hear the response, but she could imagine it. Mike would be threatening, then charming, then threatening again. It was his pattern. Dominic listened calmly, his face showing nothing. Then he spoke with chilling precision. I know about the hospital records you falsified, the accidents reported by neighbors. I have copies of everything. Back off, or those records find their way to internal affairs. When he hung up, Zoe stared at him, emotions warring within her. You investigated him. Of course I did, Dominic responded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I should feel violated by that, she said slowly. Instead, I feel... She trailed off, unable to name the complex emotion. Safe? Dominic suggested, moving closer. Yes, she admitted, and that terrifies me more than anything, trading one dangerous man for another. Dominic flinched almost imperceptibly at the comparison. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is, Zoe answered honestly, but I know I should walk away before I find out. Zoe turned back to the vegetables, needing something to do with her hands. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of her knife hitting the cutting board. She could feel Dominic still watching her. The difference, he finally said, his voice quiet, is choice. You can walk away, Zoe. Anytime. The apartment, the job, the security, they're all yours to reject. I would never stop you. Zoe kept cutting, not trusting herself to look at him. And if I stay? Then it's your decision, not mine. Such a simple answer, but it hit Zoe like a physical force. Mike had never given her choices. He had made every decision, controlled every aspect of her life. The contrast was stark and overwhelming. I need time, she whispered. To think. Dominic nodded, stepping away from her. Take all the time you need. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've never met anyone as strong as you. After he left, Zoe stood alone in the kitchen, the knife still in her hand. Through the window she could see the city lights coming on as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Mike was looking for her. Somewhere out there was the life she had run from, and the life she had tried to build in her car. And here, in this penthouse with its security cameras and armed guards, was something she never expected to find, a different kind of safety, but one that came with its own risks. The vegetables lay forgotten as Zoe wrapped her arms around herself. The heat of the kitchen couldn't touch the chill that ran through her. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly caught between two worlds. The danger she knew, and the danger she didn't. Both terrifying in their own ways. When she finally left the penthouse that night, Zoe didn't go back to her apartment. She asked the driver to take her to the beach instead. There, with the sound of waves crashing against the shore, she walked along the edge of the water and tried to untangle the knot of feelings in her chest. Fear and gratitude, caution and trust. The memory of pain and the possibility of something else. Above her, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Zoe watched them emerge, tiny points of light in the vast darkness, like choices appearing where before there had seemed to be none. Days passed with Zoe maintaining a careful distance. She still cared for Rosa each evening, but she made sure she was never alone with Dominic. When he entered a room, she found reasons to leave. When he spoke to her, she kept her answers short and professional. It was easier this way, she told herself. Safer. Rosa watched the silent dance between them with sad eyes but said nothing. Her condition had improved enough that she could move around the penthouse with a walker, and on good days, she liked to sit in the sunshine on the balcony. On one such afternoon, she took Zoe's hand. "You're afraid," the old woman said simply. Zoe adjusted the blanket over Rosa's lap. "I'm just being careful." "There's careful, and there's hiding," Rosa replied. "Trust me, I know the difference." Before Zoe could answer, one of the security guards appeared at the balcony door. "Miss Reeves, there's a package for you downstairs." Zoe frowned. "I'm not expecting anything." Security checked it. "It's clear." In the penthouse's marble lobby, Zoe found a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Her name was written on it in familiar handwriting that made her stomach clench. Mike's writing. She almost dropped the package, but security had already checked it. It couldn't be dangerous. With shaking hands, she unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small jewelry box. When she opened it, she found her old wedding ring, the one she'd left behind when she fled in the night. Beneath it was a note. "I know where you are. Come home before things get worse." Zoe's legs gave out. She sank onto a nearby bench, the box falling to the floor. One of the security guards rushed over, speaking into his radio. Minutes later, Dominic appeared, his face tight with concern. "What happened?" he demanded, kneeling in front of her. Wordlessly, Zoe pointed to the box on the floor. Dominic picked it up, read the note, and his expression hardened. "How did he find me?" Zoe whispered. "I don't know, but we're moving you immediately." Dominic helped her to her feet. "Pack what you need. You'll stay at the penthouse until we find him." Zoe didn't argue. The familiar fear was back, freezing her from the inside. She let Dominic's men escort her to her apartment, where she quickly packed a small bag. As they drove back to the tower, she stared out the window, jumping at every pedestrian who resembled Mike. The penthouse guest room was twice the size of Zoe's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, and the bed was bigger than any she'd ever slept in. But Zoe barely noticed these things. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her bag, unable to make herself unpack. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Rosa stood there, leaning on her walker. "May I come in, dear?" Zoe nodded, making room on the bed for the older woman to sit. Rosa patted her hand gently. "Dominic told me what happened," she said. "That man, your ex-husband, he is why you were living in your car when you met my grandson." It wasn't a question, but Zoe nodded anyway. "Mike he's not who everyone thinks he is." "Men rarely are," Rosa said with a sad smile. "My late husband had a face for the world and a face for me. Unfortunately, the private face was worse than the public one." Zoe looked at her in surprise. "But Dominic's grandfather was a cruel man," Rosa finished. "I stayed because I had no choice back then, but I made sure Dominic saw both sides of power, how it can protect, but also how it can destroy." Before Zoe could respond, there was another knock. Dominic stood in the doorway, his face grim. "Nonna, you should rest. It's getting late." After helping Rosa back to her room, Zoe returned to find Dominic still waiting by her door. "We've doubled security," he said. "No one gets in this building without being checked 3 times. You're safe here." Zoe nodded, too tired to argue. "Thank you." Dominic hesitated, then added, "I'll find him, Zoe, I promise." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Zoe had barely slept, but she got up early anyway. Rosa would need her medicine, and routine was important, especially now. She was just making coffee in the penthouse kitchen when her phone rang. It was Carlo, the young security guard she'd befriended. "Miss Reeves? You need to come down to the lobby right away. It's important." "Is something wrong?" Zoe asked, immediately worried. "Just come down. Alone, please." Something in his voice made Zoe uneasy, but Carlo had always been kind to her. Perhaps he had news about Mike. She told Rosa's morning nurse where she was going, then took the elevator down to the lobby. The doors opened to reveal an empty lobby. No security guards at their usual posts. No staff behind the desk. Only Carlo stood by the main entrance looking nervous. "Carlo, what's going on?" "I'm sorry," he whispered, not meeting her eyes. "He said he'd hurt my sister if I didn't help him." Before Zoe could process his words, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a column. Mike stood there in his police uniform, looking exactly as he had the day she left. Handsome, confident, and terrifying. "Hello, Zoe," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Time to come home." Zoe backed away, but Mike moved faster. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Don't make a scene," he hissed. "I've told everyone you're having an episode, that I'm taking you to get help." His other hand moved to his belt, where his gun rested in its holster. The message was clear. Zoe looked at Carlo, who stood with his head down, shame written across his face. "He'll kill you," she whispered to the young guard. "As soon as we're gone, he'll come back for you." "Shut up!" Mike snapped, twisting her arm. "We're leaving, now." He began dragging her toward the door. Zoe fought, digging in her heels, but Mike was stronger. He always had been. As they neared the exit, Zoe felt the old familiar helplessness washing over her. No matter how far she ran, he always found her. Always took her back. Then the lobby doors opened. Dominic walked in, followed by 2 of his men. He took in the scene in an instant, Zoe struggling in Mike's grip, the empty security desk, Carlo's guilty face. "Let her go," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. Mike's grip tightened. "This is a family matter and I'm a police officer. Back off." "Last chance," Dominic warned, taking a step closer. With his free hand, Mike pulled his gun, pointing it at Dominic. "I said back off. My wife needs medical help." "I'm not your wife anymore," Zoe said, finding her voice, "and I never will be again." Mike's face twisted with rage. He swung the gun toward Zoe. "You ungrateful—" Everything happened at once. Dominic lunged forward. One of his men tackled Carlo. Zoe wrenched herself free from Mike's grip, and as she stumbled backward, she saw Mike aim his gun at Dominic. Without thinking, Zoe threw herself forward, directly into the path of the bullet meant for Dominic. Pain exploded in her shoulder, hot and sharp. She heard shouting, a scuffle, another gunshot. Then strong arms caught her as she fell. Dominic's face hovered above her, his expression one of raw fear. "Zoe, stay with me, look at me." She tried to focus on his face, but darkness was creeping in from the edges of her vision. The pain in her shoulder pulsed with each heartbeat. "The shooter?" she managed to ask. "Handled," Dominic said grimly. "Don't talk. Help is coming." Through the fog of pain, Zoe reached up to touch his face. "You're not very good at asking nicely," she whispered. Something broke in Dominic's carefully maintained facade. "Please," he whispered, the word clearly foreign to him. "Please stay." As consciousness faded, Zoe realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing him as a dangerous man who occasionally showed kindness, and started seeing him as a kind man forced by circumstance into danger. "I'm not going anywhere," she managed before darkness claimed her. White ceiling tiles swam into focus as Zoe opened her eyes. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the quiet room. She tried to move, then winced as pain shot through her left shoulder. "Easy," a familiar voice said. "The doctor said not to move too much." Zoe turned her head slowly. Dominic sat in a chair beside her bed, looking more human than she had ever seen him. His usual perfect suit was wrinkled, his hair messy as if he had run his hands through it many times. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "How long?" Zoe's voice came out as a croak. 3 days, Dominic said, pouring water from a pitcher and holding the glass to her lips. "The bullet hit your shoulder. Missed anything vital. You lost a lot of blood, though." As the fog in her mind cleared, Zoe took in her surroundings. This wasn't a normal hospital room. The space was large and private, with expensive-looking medical equipment and a window overlooking the ocean. "Where am I?" "Private medical facility," Dominic explained. "Better security than a hospital, and no questions." Zoe's memory of what happened came rushing back. Mike. The gun. Throwing herself in front of Dominic. "Mike?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Something dark passed over Dominic's face. "You don't need to worry about him anymore." The way he said it told Zoe everything and nothing. She didn't ask for details. Some things were better left unknown. "Rosa comes every day," Dominic said, changing the subject. "She'll be happy you're awake." As if summoned by her name, the door opened and Rosa appeared, helped by a nurse. Her face lit up when she saw Zoe. "There she is," the old woman cried. "Our brave girl." Rosa shuffled to the bed and took Zoe's good hand in both of hers. "You scared us, child. Dominic hasn't left this room since they brought you in. I had to order him to shower this morning." Zoe glanced at Dominic, who looked almost embarrassed. It was such a normal, human expression on his usually guarded face that she couldn't help but smile. Recovery was slow. Zoe spent a week in the medical facility before the doctors allowed her to leave. Even then, her arm remained in a sling, and she tired easily. To her surprise, Dominic didn't take her back to her apartment or the penthouse. Instead, a car drove them an hour outside the city, along a winding coastal road. "Where are we going?" Zoe asked, watching the ocean appear and disappear between the trees. "Somewhere safe," Dominic answered. "Somewhere to heal." The car turned onto a private drive that wound up a small hill. At the top stood a beautiful house made of stone and glass, overlooking a private stretch of beach. Gardens surrounded it on 3 sides, and a wooden path led down to the sand. "It's beautiful," Zoe breathed as the driver helped her from the car. "It's yours," Dominic said simply, "regardless of what you decide about us. No strings." Zoe looked at him sharply. "There are always strings." "Yes," Dominic acknowledged with surprising honesty. "But now you're strong enough to cut them if needed." The house was even more beautiful inside, with open rooms that let in the ocean light and breeze. Rosa was already there, settled in a sunny room that overlooked the garden. She smiled when she saw Zoe. "He bought this place years ago," the old woman told her later as they sat on the porch. "Has never used it. Too busy with business to enjoy life." In the days that followed, Zoe grew stronger. The sea air seemed to heal more than just her physical wound. Each morning, she walked a little further along the beach. Sometimes Rosa joined her. Sometimes Dominic walked silently beside her. They rarely spoke of what had happened, but Zoe could feel something shifting between them, like sand resettling after a wave. One evening, as the sun began to set, Zoe found Dominic standing alone on the deck, looking out at the ocean. The golden light softened his features, making him look younger than his years. She joined him at the railing, close but not touching. "The doctor says I can start physical therapy next week," she said. Dominic nodded. "I've arranged for someone to come here." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the waves. The tension that had always hummed between them was still there, but different now. Less like a warning, and more like anticipation. "I've been thinking about the future," Zoe finally said. "What I want to do when I'm fully recovered." "And what's that?" "Finish nursing school. Maybe specialize in trauma care." She paused. "Help people who can't help themselves." Dominic turned to face her. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." Zoe studied his face in the fading light. "I know what you are," she said quietly. "What you've done. What you might still do." "Yes." He didn't try to explain or excuse himself. "And I know who you are with Rosa. With me." She turned to face him fully. "Most people never show anyone all of themselves. The good and the terrible. But I've seen both sides of you." "And?" Dominic asked, tension evident in his stillness. "And I choose this." Eyes open. She took his hand, the gesture simple but profound. "Not because I need protection anymore, but because somewhere between fear and fascination, I found something I wasn't looking for." Dominic's careful control faltered. He pulled her close, his embrace gentle around her healing shoulder. "I can't promise safety," he warned. "No one can," Zoe countered. "But you can promise honesty. That's all I ask." The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In that moment, with the ocean spread before them and the future uncertain but full of possibility, Zoe felt a peace she had never known before. Not because all danger had passed, but because she had found strength she never knew she possessed. 2 months later, the coastal house had become home. Rosa's health had improved dramatically with the clean air and reduced stress. She spent her days tending the garden, teaching Zoe to cook Italian dishes, and telling stories about Dominic's childhood that made him wince and Zoe laugh. Zoe had begun taking online nursing classes, working toward finishing her degree. 3 times a week she volunteered at a local clinic that helped women escaping domestic violence. She never told them who she was living with, but sometimes resources appeared for the women she was trying to help. Apartments, job opportunities, legal assistance. Zoe never asked where these came from, and Dominic never mentioned them. For his part, Dominic still traveled to the city regularly for business, but he spent more and more time at the coastal house. Zoe noticed subtle changes: fewer late-night phone calls, fewer men in suits appearing with urgent matters. When she finally asked what was happening, his answer was simple. "Restructuring," he said, "moving toward more legitimate enterprises." Zoe knew better than to expect an overnight transformation. The world Dominic controlled wasn't one that could be abandoned quickly or easily, but she recognized it for what it was. Not a change made for her, but a shift in priorities that she had helped inspire. One evening, as they walked along the beach at sunset, Rosa watching them from the deck above, Dominic stopped and turned to Zoe. "I've never thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For saving my life, yes. But more than that." He looked out at the ocean, then back at her. "For reminding me that I had choices, that I could be more than what circumstances made me." Zoe smiled, taking his hand. "We all have choices. Sometimes we just need someone to help us see them." Above them, Rosa called out, waving for them to come up for dinner. Her voice carried on the wind, strong and happy. Zoe and Dominic turned toward the house, walking slowly up the wooden path that led from the beach. Their world remained precarious, a delicate balance of past obligations and new possibilities. But in the quiet moments, Watching Rosa tend her garden or Dominic learning to exist without constant vigilance, Zoe recognized the transformation in all of them. Three broken people who found in each other not just safety, but home. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't conventional, but it was theirs, built with full awareness of both the darkness and the light.